with the Vaccine Connector at vaccineconnector.mn.gov to find and how to get.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you underground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We've had enough
of all the money you were making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. You better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough of all the rules you're breaking. We've had enough all the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We've had enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We've had enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We've had enough. So many gone. How can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We've had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard. We've had enough. Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand. We've had enough. Sean Bell, what the hell? We've had enough. Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said? We've had enough. This is a proclamation.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Beautiful Tuesday, great weekend. I hope yours was wonderful and uneventful, at least in the wrong way, and eventful in the positive and community and family way. An opportunity to think and memorialize those people who served our country, served our community, those ancestors. We thank them for the path that they created for us and for the work they did to build opportunity for our country, for humanity. Well, today I've got a great program. I want to start, though, by talking with just a friend who might not be able to stay on very long, Lee Jordan. Lee, if you're backstage, why don't you come on to the front stage here? And I want to just take a quick second to begin the program talking about the fact that we're coming up on Juneteenth. And equally important is that in the past few days, we've been watching and hearing and reading so much about the Black Wall Street, about Tulsa. And I think it bears, it's important enough for us to talk about it right now. Lee, tell us about Tulsa and Black Wall Street quickly, if you could.
Well, can you, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak upon that. Of course, the Wall Street was Black Wall Street was a town in Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood area, that was basically destroyed because of a group of people that felt that they just they just couldn't handle what was going on as far as black independence, black dollars, and so because of a false report of possible assault of a woman, that they came through and burned the community and killed quite a few people and destroyed the town that was very was flourishing. And to me, that's a part of our Juneteenth celebration is the fact that we want black dollars to flourish. And this is the time for us to pull together to make that happen. I'm not exactly sure if that's what you wanted me to say, but
That's exactly what I wanted. I want you to take a minute and give a number or email address where people can contact you to support and participate in Juneteenth 2021.
I would say the best thing to do is to reach out to the park board, go to their website, click on events. Also, you can go to a Facebook page that I have called Juneteenth Speaks. I will be putting on a lot of the information as far as the celebrations going on across the cities. And of course, we have our celebration tonight, which is called Juneteenth Lights Up Minnesota. We will have the 35W Bridge lit up. The Science Museum over in St. Paul and Nicollet Mall will be lit up to represent the first days of the kickoff of the Juneteenth celebration for 2021.
Lee Jordan, thank you so much. I want you to come back as often as you can over the next several days and weeks. We do this podcast 5 days a week with the radio broadcast 1 day a week today on Tuesday. But I want to make sure that we're putting all of our energy into supporting and promoting you and us in our observation of Juneteenth. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, totally. Thank you.
Great. Keith Ellison is here, and also in the back room is Hollis Winston. Why don't you bring both of those guys in? Attorney General Keith Ellison, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How's it going?
It's going well, going well. Wanted to talk to you about an important event coming up this weekend. You're doing something around the issue of vaccinations, the vaccination clinic in North Minneapolis. And let's start with that. And then I want you to engage me and Brother Hollis Winston in the politics of the moment. So
it's good to see Hollis too, by the way. How you doing, Hollis?
Good. Brother. Good to see you, Attorney General.
Yeah, man. Very proud of you, sir. Well, hey, let me tell you
what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so here's the thing. On Saturday, June 5th, we're going to have a vaccination fair. Mm-hmm. We need you to come to it. It's going to be in the parking lot of the Twin Cities Urban League. It's going to be done in partnership with North Point Clinic, led by the great Stella Whitney West and her great group of staff members looking after the health of people in North Minneapolis for many years. And so the Attorney General's office, the Urban League, and the North Point, working with other electeds like Councilman Jeremiah Ellison and Senator Bobby Champion and Esther Azabuje and then of course Irene Fernando and are all coming together, and we're trying to get people to show up and get vaccinated. We want to get at least 500 people vaccinated. We're going to have music. We're going to have a live DJ. We're going to have food trucks coming up. We're going to try to do everything we can to get people vaccinated. The truth is that as many as 70% of white Minneapolitans have received at least one vaccination. And that's good. We want all Minnesotans, all Minneapolisans vaccinated. Only around 28% of African Americans have been, and only about 35% of people of Latino background have been. This gap mirrors the same old ugly gap that we see year in, year out, whether it's incarceration, whether it's in student test scores, whether it's in housing ownership. And we've got to stop this unequal ladder of opportunity, and let's start it with protecting people from COVID disease. I mean, so June 5th, pretty much all day, we're going to be DJing, we're going to be knocking doors, we're going to be in the media trying to get people vaccinated. Some folks have said, is it because African Americans have this legacy of being victims of experimentation? Maybe. Certainly there is a historical reference for this, but I'm here to tell people this is not that. This is just trying to stop you from getting COVID disease, which can kill you and has killed a lot of people. So we want people to show up, get your vaccination, and that's what we need, June 5th. And come on down and hang out, have some music, get something to eat, chill with your neighbors. I hear it's going to be 91 and sunny. So you ain't got nothing better to do than get yourself vaccinated.
Stay alive.
Stay alive.
That's the most important thing. And this is a strategy to help you stay alive and to help you keep other people around you alive. And we all have an obligation. We've got a duty together. Even if we don't care so much about whether we can tough it out or not, or if we think that we're Superman and Superwoman and we can withstand it, that's one thought. It's wrong thought, but some of us feel that way. But what if you're doing the right thing will save a child's life, save an elder's life, save a neighbor's life? Then, it's not about you so much. It's about we. It's about all of us. Not about I, but we, right? And I think that's the attitude and the message we've got to bring forward, that we are in this together and we've got to do this, and we have an obligation. We have a duty. And the duty right now is to show up and get vaccinated,
do it.
And so Keith, let me ask you, we're going to come back to that in a couple of seconds, but I wanted you to weigh in because I watched a couple of shows on TV last night and night before on the Tulsa bombing, the massacre of Black people and Black families about 100 years ago. Give me some more background on that. I know you studied this. What should we know about this?
Well, what you should know about the Tulsa riot, and it really was not a rebellion. It was an attack on the Black community of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was one of the few times when airplanes were deployed against a civilian population in the United States. They were literally bombing Black communities in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There really has not been much in the popular media about Tulsa. Of the few shows that have ever depicted it, there was a recent one, called The Watchmen, in which there was a little bit of that in there. And then there was a little bit of a depiction in Lovecraft Country. But the popular media has not really helped the people of the United States understand that based on a false allegation of a sexual assault. Of course, by the way, this never happened. There was a Black man who apparently bumped into some white woman in some office building, in an elevator. And then mobs were going to go down to the jail to attack him. Some African-American men said, no, we're not going to stand around and let that happen. White society, together with law enforcement, responded with overwhelming force, including airplanes, and burned and sacked and destroyed the community. But it's important to understand this was a phenomenon that was well known to America at that time. Similar attacks. I mean, the one depiction in the popular media has been Rosewood. We do know about Rosewood in Florida. There needs to be a film about Tulsa, but you could also do one on many places. I mean, look, in 1920, you had the Duluth attacks on African Americans, lynched 3 Black circus workers from a light pole, had 2 trumped up kangaroo court trials for 2 others who managed to survive. By the way, in Duluth, they burned down the police precinct. Just so you know, that the 3rd precinct, when it was burned down, was not the first time a police precinct was burned down in Minnesota. Actually, one was burned down by a white mob in 1920 to try to murder those 3 circus workers and others. So that happened in Duluth. So, I mean, this is part of look, 1920, you're literally talking about, people were walking around who had lived through slavery in the United States, right? There were people who, slavery, if you say slavery ended 1865, 75, 85, 95, right? and then 2005. I mean, 1905, and then you're right. And then 10 years later, you're right there. People who had it within their memory of being in involuntary servitude in the United States, and people. And right now, you have some people who, we're just now starting to lose the people who actually may be able to tell us about Tulsa, who were there. So this is recent history stuff, and it really raises the issue of, this whole attack on critical race theory and the 1619 Project, because these folks are literally trying to erase history. Now they'll insist upon some statute built in 1950 dedicated to Robert E. Lee, right? And say that's history, but then they don't. But then they'll pass an executive order stopping you from talking about Tulsa. The hypocrisy is stunning, but we are in a point where we need more scholarship. We need. Actually, quite honestly, Al, we need some people to write some songs about Tulsa, some poems about Tulsa, some plays about Tulsa. We need to make it something that people know about, and then explore other occasions, where there have been, massive white violence against Black communities. Last point I'll make is that, things like Tulsa really did sort of offend the sensibilities of the business class, although the business class was part of it. But it did make them think, well, wait a minute, what are we running? What kind of country are we running here? This looks so uncivilized, so brutal, so bad. And that is around this time in American history is when you started seeing the death penalty become much more used as a tool. And so there is a direct link between these massacres and the death penalty. It really is just a polished up version of how to intimidate and put fear and immobilize Black communities. So we go from slavery to this, to where we are now, where we have massive incarceration, police violence, and a few other things.
And we have so many states now trying to roll back voting opportunity for Black people.
Oh, yeah. We can dive into that.
And successful effort so far to deny Black people, or people in general, but particularly Blacks and Browns, access to the ballot. And the issue being, I watched the news this morning, a promotion saying that in 2045, people of color will be the majority in this nation, meaning whites will be the minority. And the question is, what will that do to change the body politic? What will it do to change the vision and the articulated goals of what democracy can mean if it is inclusive of everybody, inclusive of Black and brown voters and residents in ways that it never has been before? And so what we're seeing is this thinly veiled or even unmasked, brazen effort to deny voter access to Black and brown people under the guise of the Trump lie that there was massive fraud in the last election and that Trump still won the election. What do we do about that? And how does this connect, Keith Ellison, Attorney General Ellison, to the horrific story you just described about Tulsa?
Well, see, the thing is that our United States has always been a tug of war. It's always been a tug of war between the slavers and the abolitionists, the civil rights people and the racist segregationist states' rights people. It's always been this tug of war. Some people say, well, this country is racist to the core. And I won't deny that, but I'll say it's not only that. There have always been people who said justice, liberty, equality, and they stood up for it. They fought for it. Sometimes they died for it. And there's always been this tug of war. Now, those people, after 1865, felt like they lost. And they called their movement the Lost Cause, right? Mm-hmm. And they're neo-Confederates today. Back then, they felt defeated. What they did is they said, we might have lost the war, but we're not going to lose the peace. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to erect statues. We're going to erect black codes. We're going to erect segregation. We're going to use lies like black inferiority, black disease, black criminality, and we're going to erect all these things to sort of, if we can't control African Americans through legal slavery, we're going to control them through segregation and convict leasing and the criminal justice system, and then we're going to just intimidate them into stay in your part of the town. If we need you to work our farms, we'll call you, and then we'll pay you what we want to pay you, not what you deserve. And then we're not going to give you a voice in politics. Remember, when it wasn't until 1965, not 1921, 1965, before we passed the Voting Rights Act. There was no Black caucus at this time in Congress. The last African American in Congress was in the year 1900, when the last one was sent back in. And so, what does this fight for voting rights have to do today? It is a strain of the American population who can't conceive of the African person outside of servitude. They don't want to share the country, and they're willing to destroy the country just to maintain their privilege. That's the truth. Now, do all white people feel that way? Absolutely not. We know that. We know there's John Brown. We know there's there's many others who fought and pushed for liberty and justice for all. We know that, but we also know that the people who want to keep privilege are a powerful group. They're still a powerful group, and so I'll just say this: what stands before us today is to understand that the battle, this tug of war that I mentioned before, is going on now. It's continuing, and we have to continue to stand up and push. Because I'll tell you this: you know what happens if we ever land at true equality in voting and racial harmony and inclusion and respect and acceptance? Everybody's better off. That's where we're at. I mean, wait a minute. Under which president did we expand healthcare access? White people in rural Kentucky got healthcare because of the Black president. Mm-hmm. Look, if we actually controlled all these guns out here, white people would live longer. Do you know that in the state of Missouri, when they got rid of all the gun laws and said you can get a gun here, you can get a gun there, here, there, everywhere, take them wherever you want, do whatever you want, the number one group that saw suicide gun deaths go up is white men over 50. We don't talk. Do we talk about that? We don't talk about that. See, look, under white supremacy ideology, white people are not allowed to have pathologies. So you don't hear about it. We don't hear about young white men taking guns to school and shooting up the whole school. We don't hear about older white men turning guns on themselves and dying from suicide, cirrhosis, opioid addictions. All they want to do is come to North Minneapolis and talk about the pathology and the poverty of values and how you ain't got no values and how you need to learn how to be a human being. They want to do that
meaning how to be white.
but see, the thing that
you will never be.
The things they want to teach you how to do, you already know.
That's right.
I mean, they want to teach you homemade class. Wait a minute. Who made the homes during the antebellum days? Mm-hmm. You can't even pour us a little bit of syrup on some pancakes without looking at who was making home then. Now they want to give you homemaking classes as a Black woman. My point is the other side of racial healing and harmony is a better America for everyone. That's the beauty of this thing. I mean, there's a lot of white people lost their voting rights because the racists want to take them from Black people. There's a lot of white people who don't have health care access because they can't stand Obamacare. There's a lot of white people who are suffering because of this racialized fear, which propels people to buy guns, ends up people turning it on themselves. There's a very good book, Al, and I would commit to your leaders, called "Dying of Whiteness." A white public health professional wrote a book called "Dying of Whiteness," and it's all about how clear health measures among white people have gotten worse because of racialized policies because they think it's going to get you, but it doesn't just get you. It gets everybody. Yeah, it gets them too. And so it's just bad, and we need to end it. We need to say liberty and justice for all. And, we don't fight racism with racism. We fight racism with human solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do. All right.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane, my guest, Attorney General Keith Ellison. Thank you, Keith, for being here. If you're listening on YouTube, we want you to subscribe to the channel. If you're joining us nationally through Black Press USA, we welcome you to this conversation. We're here every day doing a social media presentation at 1 o'clock. This is a special one because we also have the power of KFAI. We also are projecting this in the region through the McFarlane Media Dashboard, our Facebook and other social media platforms, and we want you to like and share. Let us know that you're here. You can participate by commenting. We welcome your comments, and we'll try to get those to our guests and to each other as well. I want to welcome my co-host today, Anthony Taylor. Anthony Taylor and I are going to be talking about things that everything falls in this general conversation about what it means to create a quality of life, sustainability, healthy approaches to life. And I also want to welcome a person that's a friend of yours and mine, probably Anthony's as well. And that's Hollis Winston. Hollis Winston is the democratically endorsed candidate for the mayor of the city of Brooklyn Park. Hollis, how you doing, man? And I see Keith had to check out. I'm sorry you have to leave, but I want you to be here to check him out and him to hear you as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, and my thing is that the issues we've discussed really come to a particular point of being addressed in your candidacy. You and as you become, hopefully, the next mayor of Brooklyn Park, you and your colleague in Brooklyn Center will be the leaders of city councils that are more reflective of the diversity of Twin Cities. And I think in many ways, you'll be leading a community that is a bellwether for every other metropolitan community, including the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul. What is happening with the shifting demographics in Brooklyn Center, your town, Brooklyn Park, your town, and Brooklyn Center is simply the forerunner of what's happening broadly, both in the country, but also here in Twin Cities. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for what you've done already in the public service arena. And thank you for being a candidate and the endorsed candidate for the mayor of Brooklyn Park. Let me ask you to simply introduce yourself and your campaign. And Anthony and I are going to engage with you about things we think that we want to know and that voters want to know about this election.
Yeah, so I'll keep the intro brief, but I'm the Democrat endorsed candidate running for mayor of Brooklyn Park. Brooklyn Park is 56% people of color. Largely before it was majority minority, it was also very much working class. Brooklyn Park is very much defined by its diversity, not just in terms of African American, African immigrant population, Hmong population, but also socioeconomically. So below 85th. Traditionally, it's been a little bit more working class, and then when you get above 610, you've got folks living in $400,000 or $500,000 homes, and so really part of the future of Brooklyn Park is tying that all together and making it a city that works for everybody, right? And I think to your point, that's very much where the United States is going. In terms of you see the suburbs are becoming much more diverse, right? And then even when you see some of the gentrification, you have suburbs that maybe traditionally they've had more wealth, but then you've got folks moving out who are just saying, "Hey, I'm just trying to find a way to make it, and I want to get to your level at some point as well." So I think what's exciting about Brooklyn Park is taking all of that and saying, let's tie it together and make it a place where when people move to Brooklyn Park, they're able to be prosperous. They're able to interact with law enforcement in a way where everyone feels comfortable, everyone feels safe, right? And that's where the country I think, desperately wants to move. If you refer to some of the forces that, Attorney General Ellison was speaking to, there are a number of folks that are fighting that. And we see even some of them here in Brooklyn Park where I like how Attorney General Ellison put it, but I would also say there's folks whose their very definition of self is based upon how badly African Americans, are doing specifically, right? And so we deal with some of that in Brooklyn Park, but I think it's a minority, and I think the majority of people are saying, how do we knit this together so that we can be the suburb of the future and have all the things we want, in our city. So the campaign is very much about making that happen. My background is as a businessman, MBA. Currently have a business where I work with small businesses, helping businesses of color, advocating for them at the Capitol. So I think it's also a good fit for what we see in Brooklyn Park.
You've been a candidate for office before. Talk about your political career.
Yeah, so I ran in 2018, and it was a difficult race. We ran. I ran against an incumbent who had been there for 2 terms. He's going on his 3rd term. But we were actually able to move the dial quite a bit. So the person who ran before got 8,000 votes to his 12,000. We turned around and we got 13,100 to his 15,000. So we ended up getting 5,100 more votes, cutting that margin in half.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this election, we feel much we feel much better about our odds. We won the primary pretty convincingly. And so going into the special election, we're just having as many conversations with people as possible. And I've been actively involved as chair of the African American DFL Caucus. We had a youth mentor program, and we raised money for kids, and we would connect them with electeds who are running for office. One of the more well-known ones is Mayor Melvin Carter. So we did a ton of door knocking for him. The youth got to meet him, and it's funny that they don't teach civics like they did when we were growing up. And so he was explaining to them how the regulations and the laws are made and the size of the budget that he's working with, and the ability for him to affect things at a local level, right? So I think when you talk about relationship between the police and community and African American community, much of that resides with him. And the youth had no idea about that, right? But now going forward, they understand why that local election is so important, why they need to be involved. So I'm very proud of that program, as well as, I was involved with the Biden campaign as regional political director. So I've had a lot of, interaction on that level, but also regular day gig is just, consultant helping businesses. So.
Anthony, jump in whenever you want to. Question to start with, Anthony?
No, actually, it's great to be connected today. I spent some time with the family from ACER's organization with Sister Nalima over there, and they're very excited about it. And I think there is a tremendous amount of activism. I mean, I think the community is really coming behind you. And like I said, I think really excited about the work that you've built over these last years. And so that's really exciting. Maybe you can speak to, and I think one of the things that we're going to be speaking about is development and community. There is a lot of development happening there, right? There's a lot of kind of economic and community development happening. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for that, and really, again, how we create benefits for the community that already lives there, right? It has a on their well-being.
Yeah, so I think the vision I'm running on is much more, it's not really revolutionary until you apply it to African Americans and, incoming immigrants and other folks, but because newer immigrants tend to be blacker and browner. But if you look at other cities, or traditionally when, Swedish or Irish or German or Italian came in, they would get very involved at the municipal level, and they would fight to get influence. And then they would use some of those resources to build institutions that would strengthen their communities locally, but that also would strengthen the city, make the city a better place. And then you go to cities like Chicago, and even in Minneapolis, you see older institutions that were built that way that still contribute to the city. And so for me, it's saying, okay, well, how do we apply that to not just folks who have been here for some time, because they kind of have that inside scoop, but how do we apply it to some of the newer communities, and then, African American community, Latino community. How do we find ways to help strengthen those institutions? So when you look at, you've got organizations like OLM, you've got other community organizations who exist, say, within the Igbo tribe, Nigerian community, right? They exist to kind of protect their culture and help their children grow up within the culture, right? And you say, well, if they're doing a good job of tutoring their children and providing resources, why wouldn't we want to give them more resources so they can kind of scale that up within their community and help get their community more involved with some of the institutions at the city level, right? So for me, it's kind of saying where are some of the gaps within the city, So maybe we need more support with soccer or with basketball or with tutoring or some pre-K programming. Who are some of the folks who are already doing this within the community, and how do we take some of these resources and allocate them in a way that help these folks do the work they're doing, just do it better? And they don't have to scramble for every little dollar. They can now have the resources to scale this up and do a better job. So I think for me, that's kind of the overall vision. And then when you look at an organization like Acer, who's advocated for, affordable housing and small businesses and very much the immigrant community, I think it's sitting down with them and saying, you've had somewhat of an ear. How do we get you a bigger ear so that some of these ideas that you're working with, they can get more support, but you can also help us bring the community in so that we have a better understanding of what's going on, and we can implement those programs. And the last thing I'll say is, Brooklyn Park has they've got a budget issue, right? So, we've got to find some creative ways to bring some of the programming to Brooklyn Park at a less expensive cost than we have in the past. And we've got to find a way to leverage some of our public resources along, public safety resources along with community resources so that we're not breaking the budget every year. And I think a lot of that has to do with two things. One, how do we work better with the community? Two, stepping back, and I know you were talking about development, Anthony, but stepping back and saying, we've got all these plans for development in the city of Brooklyn Park. Maybe we need to step back and take a strategic look and say, where are some opportunities that we can permanently get ahead of developing this city? So increase the tax base. It's not falling on property owners, right? It's falling more so on a more diverse tax base of businesses and folks who own their own homes, right? So I think there's a lot we have to do, but I think much of it starts with saying, here's the resources, here's the community resources we have. We're going to bring them in to help, and then finding ways to leverage our resources while we work with them.
Anthony,
sorry for the long answer, man. But
no, it's a good answer. Let's build on it in community. Anthony, you're working with the Wellness Center and with, I think, Project for Pride in Living, PPL, to do a major development in South Minneapolis on the corner of Lake and Nicollet. And you're partnering with Wells Fargo, I believe, and others to reimagine what's going to happen at Nicollet and Lake, having come through both the pandemic, the disruption that followed the George Floyd murder last year, and also at a time when the city is rethinking whether it made the right decision in blocking off the Nicollet Avenue thoroughfare to put in the Kmart and Super Value businesses that were there that changed, the nature and movement of people and commerce and business in South Minneapolis, particularly along Nicollet Avenue. So talk about what you're doing there, because I'm interested in having Holly Winston's feedback on how he can use development in Brooklyn Center, and whether you have ideas of how to partner with, I keep saying Brooklyn Center, forgive me, Brooklyn Park, and connecting with other suburban cities. Are there things that you can do regionally, collaboratively, that advantage all? But Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about Brooklyn Park, as a matter of fact, and I do know many people there that are really trying to do some different things, including the parks, community there, the economic development, again, organizations like Acer. But at Lake and Nicollet, Again, the Cultural Wellness Center is collaborating with PPL, who is the developer that has been the land has been turned over by Wells Fargo. And I think that this is really significant to understand that Wells Fargo was a landowner. PPL now has control and is going to be the developer there. And what we are committing to is to do an engagement process that begins to get people to think aspirationally about their quality of life through the timeline of a development, instead of thinking about what color is the building going to be. So we start our process this Thursday night, where we're inviting community members via Zoom right now, but really, again, to understand the history of a neighborhood. Brother, you were right on about thinking about the history of immigrant communities coming into a community. And what we're going to do is start out by showing people the legacy and the history of the ways that immigrant communities are moving into the community, starting with what were immigrants that now qualify themselves as white, right? Moving through the African-American community, the Latinx community, and most recently the Somali community, of how they have come in. And actually, culture has been a significant piece of the glue as you're describing community, the Yoruba. I mean, you're absolutely right. We see culture as an asset and something that can be multiplied by targeted investments. And so at Lake and Nicollet, we're actually looking at how will we turn this into the net quality of life experiences for people in the community in the form of improved healthcare, improved median household income, increased home ownership, right? Increased educational attainment, and where we can remove those disparities. And I think you are right on. We are now practically trying to put into practice what you were describing, using PPL as the right developer, partnering with the city of Minneapolis, and we're seeing it regionally. We know that Lake and Nicollet is actually, and the language that I use is around mobility. So when you look at that bikeable, walkable distance, which is only 1 mile to 3 mile radius, and you look at the people that are inside of that, what we're trying to do is target opportunity to the people that live there. So as this development happens, they are actually not priced out of their own neighborhood. And we're not going to entertain simply the conversation of more affordable housing. Because when you make housing affordable for a community that's living at $28,000 a year, that's what we used to call projects. So we want to target these investments to grow median household income in the near community from $28,000 to $43,000. And again, this is a partnership with PPL, Wells Fargo, City of Minneapolis, and the Cultural Wellness Center to implement these strategies while the development is happening so that these benefits are realized there. And I think Brooklyn Park is a wonderful example because you have civic agency on your side, right? The PLC.
I think we lost Anthony. But Holly's, go ahead and respond. You can jump in there because he's put something on the table there. But
yeah,
Holly, and you're so close in as I'm addressing you as the mayor already, kind of, but as the mayor of Brooklyn Park, you're hands-on in a specific, definable and historic, authority and community that I think is rich. And you'll be guiding and directing and marshaling ideas, right, from community and from all the interest sectors, the residents, the businesses, from the church leaders, the faith leaders, and all of them to come up with a cohesive plan or overlapping and sometimes competing plans. What do you think?
So no pressure, Al.
No pressure. That's right.
But no, I do. I think it is a historic, opportunity, and I like what Anthony was getting at in terms of, hey, look, we want to increase people's median income. We don't want to create the projects, right? And I think what's special about Brooklyn Park is you do have that socioeconomic variability, and in some ways, it can be a strength in terms of saying, hey, look, we have some natural inbuilt affordable housing, so folks can come out here, and I kind of say, we have a ton of corporations out here in Brooklyn Park that we brought out here. They got tax, they got tax breaks and all that. And I said, well, this is the opportunity to address some of the gaps that we see within Brooklyn Park. So if we're saying, we have an issue where we don't have a diverse enough tax revenue, it's primarily overwhelmingly just homeowners, right? Well, this is an opportunity to say, how do we increase getting businesses here, supporting businesses of color? How do we bring, and then, all businesses as well, but how do we also, how do we create something bigger? So, they're creating in North Hennepin, they're creating, I think it's CETA, it's going to be like an art center, right? So how do we, when we have opportunities like that, how do we build something around that, right? And there could be a housing component, but there also needs to be this business component. There also needs to be this cultural element, and the city needs to be saying this whole time, we're not just investing to hit these small gaps, we're also investing in newer communities, African American community, because those are also going to be some of the key people or groups just based on demographics.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be the leaders of these future institutions. And if they're not prepared to do that, right, then America has a much larger problem than just race itself. It's got a problem where it's saying the basic institution that holds together, we don't have enough talent to fit into those slots, right? So when you look at, even when you look at Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota overall, and you look at the number of Fortune 500s we have, if you go to Carlson and you graduate, whether it's undergrad or MBA, you're coming out to a place that is one of the, not the larger states, right? But they've got probably 15 Fortune 500s, and then all the suppliers that go with that.
Mm-hmm.
And what those companies are going to say, what they're saying now is, we have to have a workforce that's educated, that knows who we are, that wants to stay in this state.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're saying, if it's going to be blacker and it's going to be browner, in addition to white folks, right, they all have to be educated and familiar with certain institutions to a certain point where they can immediately just flow from college into our workforce, right? Otherwise, they say, we're moving. We're going to go somewhere else where we can get the talent and we don't have to raise all the talent, right? So I think it is partially about that overall development that Anthony was talking about, but it's also about, as a city, saying we got to connect these businesses more to the youth. We've got to connect unions more to the youth. We've got to get youth and folks more involved in our future institutions, because these are the folks that are going to run them. So for me, right, it's just like looking at my kids' grandkids whenever they have them, right, and saying, you're going to be the ones overseeing the institutions that are taking care of me.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to be prepared, right? Because I don't want to have to be doing this till I'm 80 or 90. I need you to be prepared. So I think once cities, especially a city like Brooklyn Park, begins to see itself that way as this incubator of future talent, then it's a lot easier to start having these conversations with these different organizations and pulling them together.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Thank you for being with us here on KFAI. And if you're joining us nationally through Black Press USA, we welcome you. We want you to like the program on Black Press USA Facebook page and tell your friends about it. We do this every day at 1 o'clock. And on the Tuesday edition, like today, we also include our broadcasts on KFAI. And if you're listening on KFAI, thank you for your support of the station, support of this program. And if you're connecting with us on social media through the McFarlane Media Interest social media platforms, we welcome you there as well. We want you to like and share, comment on this conversation. Your voice, your vision, your interest are center here. And Anthony Taylor is co-hosting with me today. Anthony, welcome back. Dropped you for a second there, but let's take a minute and talk about where you're from. Where are you a native of, and how you came to be involved in the political life?
Yeah, so when folks come to my fundraisers or other events, I usually start with this aspect of it. And I kind of look at myself as just as a child of the Black diaspora. It doesn't really start with me. So I was born in Illinois, but to me, it always goes back to my grandparents were from Mississippi and Arkansas. And my grandfather actually saw lynching when he was younger. And so he decided to move to Chicago. On the Arkansas side, they just wanted a better opportunity. And so I think, they moved to Illinois and they had an extreme work ethic. They started businesses. They also had, my grandfather was on my mother's side was a foreman, and on my father's side, he had a tavern and he also was a meat cutter by day. So they had these regular day jobs. And then my grandmother on my grandfather's side also owned a convenience store, right? And so they translated that into opportunities for the next generation. So my mother actually went to private school, which was rare back then, and she went to Yale, and they worked themselves up. If you know Chicago, right? They moved. If you know all the red line, they initially moved to the west side of Chicago in the projects, where I remember my mother telling me a story. She was about to go outside and play with the cat, and her mother said, "Cookie, don't go outside, play with that cat. That's a rat, right?" So the rats were big, you know what I mean? So that was part of the problem. And if people know that history, my family is part of that in terms of, they weren't living in these apartments with nice windows and stuff like now. It was a concrete block, right? And then they had to fight to get out of that. And on my grandfather's side, a similar story, but he ended up owning a business, and my father ended up being one of the folks that integrated school called Lindblom, and then he went on to college, right? So to me, and then he got an opportunity to move to Minnesota to work for a company called NSP, and my mom came up here and she joined an insurance company. So I think I always look at myself as a progression of the Black diaspora, and we're all in different timelines when it comes to that, right? But that to me is my background. And so I was born in Illinois on South Side. Then I moved to the Schaumburg area, and then I ended up moving here when I was 10 years old. Lived a little bit in Minneapolis, then we moved out to Plymouth. So that's my story. It ain't everybody's story, right? But I always say that the Black diaspora is, it is what it is, right? And we're all in a different place. But for me, it's always been largely an opportunity to march upwards. However, I always was taught growing up that, there are times my dad and his friends would be out at 12 or 13, and police would pick one of them up, right, for doing nothing. And that kid's life was changed, and he got lucky, got off the hook, and his friends got off the hook. And so he was able to go on and continue to do certain things in his life. And I think that's the whole story for me, has always been, I've never looked at our story as saying, well, we were able to knock it out the park. It's always been, sometimes we zigged when others zagged, and sometimes we just got basically lucky. And I want to remove that luck factor when it comes to our community, to where it's basically, and this is what excites me about Brooklyn Park, it's always this vision I've told people. I said, what happens when your son is 16 and he runs this red light, because a red light or a stop sign, because he's 16 and maybe he wasn't paying attention, and the police come up behind him? You don't want your son to worry about it potentially being a death sentence, right? Or he's going to get beat up, or his record is going to be, changed for the rest of his life. You want it to be, the police officer says, I don't want to see this again. I know your parents. I know this isn't you. If I do see you again, the next time you're getting written up. And then that kid goes on with their life, right? And then they go on to be a senator or president or businessman or whatever. So when you ask me that question about, where I'm from, my background and all that, it's fully ensconced in the whole African-American experience. And I see myself all up and down the spectrum of where people are. It's just chance, in many ways.
I think the story is wonderful. Anthony, tell your story if you don't mind. I think that's a good thing we can do, is to share where we've come from and through personally, because none of us does it alone. And everything we do is a reflection of what our parents and neighbors and grandparents and what our ancestors, have sort of placed before us and within us. Anthony?
Well, Brother Howell's story is my story. Except we were the last part of the Great Migration from Mississippi to Milwaukee. And so the stories are very, very similar. And I think that, the other part of your story that I think I always highlight, particularly around the story of Black people, is that there's a tendency not to treat the story of Black people as an immigrant story. That, again, what you're describing, moving to Chicago, right? That one, your father saw a lynching, was moved. Immigration happens either because of fear, risk, danger, or opportunity. That is, and so the story of the African-American people moving to the Twin Cities was really the same thing. And we don't often think about, matter of fact, there's very little acknowledgement of Black people who moved to Minnesota on the South Side, North Side, Rondo, as people that had an immigration story where they moved into a community, took the worst job, shared one apartment with 5 families, shared a car, saved their money, worked hard. That is an immigrant story that we do not, and it is the same story. We were immigrants inside of our own national geography, right? Looking for opportunity, running from fear. And again, very, very similar for me moving to Milwaukee. I have a lot of family on the west side and south side, so I know those, the grounds that you talk about intimately. And I came to Minnesota for school, for college. And what I will say is that I also benefited from the way that Black people move. As Mr. McFarlane's family, my parents met I was absorbed by Black families from Mississippi who knew, and taken care of, right? The thing we do is we absorb each other's children, right? We do aunties, uncles, cousins, we don't need all of that. And I think that's very much reflected in what's happening in Brooklyn Park, for example, what happened on the South Side, I think that story of telling and making us part of and it's really exciting actually to think about in Brooklyn Park, where again, Black people are one of the newer immigrants to those communities, right? And the connection there, but we don't often tell that story. So
yeah, and I like to say, when you talk about that initial first few waves, right? You say basically we were refugees in our own land, right? We just down south, it was nothing, and there's nothing against the folks who stayed, but I think there were just folks who said, no, this is, you hear some of the stories about if you were a beautiful sister in Mississippi or in Arkansas, what you were at risk of, and why families would just disappear in the middle of the night and move to the north, right? When their kids hit a certain age. So I think one of the reasons that I do connect with, more of the immigrant communities in Brooklyn Park is because initially when they come over here, they're taught, well, African Americans are this. Not all of them, but a lot of them are taught, well, this is what African Americans are. And then they hear me tell my story, and I say, no, you don't understand. We weren't just chilling down south, just singing, spirituals, picking cotton and saying, well, things will get a little better, but it's not that bad right now. It was people were living in a type of fear that I think other immigrants say, oh, I'm familiar with that. That's why I came over here. I wanted to move away from that. Like I remember, my father would tell me stories. They would go visit Chicago, and they're from Chicago. So, I mean, they would go visit Arkansas, and they're from Chicago. So they would have to be coached of, hey, we're going back home. This is how you act. And I remember my dad had asthma. He had an asthma attack at the train station. And someone said, why don't you tell that little N-word to shut up, right? Before I come down there. And, and the fear of, if someone said that to my child, I'd say, this might be the last day for you, buddy, right? But back then, it was a real fear of, I got to make my kid who has asthma cough quieter because they might get the whole family. And I think maybe some of the immigrant population understand, but a lot of people don't understand when they look at us as, oh, these folks descended from that.
That's right.
And now they're making their way.
I love this conversation because, Anthony, my father's side is Cuban, Jamaican, right? And I've written that both my parents are immigrants. And I say the obvious is that my dad comes from the Caribbean, but my mom is an immigrant from Mississippi, right? And so I hear you both saying the same kind of thing, that moving, the Great Migration is an immigrant experience, and it's a wonderful thing. Anthony, where in Mississippi is your family from?
My family is from Grenada and south of there, so really from Jackson, Grenada, Clarksdale, all the way down to Biloxi. So they kind of run that part of Mississippi.
How about you, Hollis? Where's your family from?
I can't remember if it's Aberdeen. I can't. They hated it so much they wouldn't talk about Mississippi.
And didn't go back. Have you gone
back?
Would
not. They wouldn't visit. They hated visiting, and they would not.
Have you been to Mississippi?
Talk about it. No.
Okay.
I need to go.
You got to go. You got to go. Anthony, how about you? Have you been to Mississippi?
Oh yeah, it was a pilgrimage in summers, and but I think I will tell you one thing that Hollis is right about having to reorient yourself socially when you move back to Mississippi, and even as kids, we would have to get coached on that. But I do remember making that drive from Milwaukee, and you got to do it in one big hop. right? You're not stopping through gas stations.
No.
Right. It was very interesting, but real. And I think something that Brother House has talked about is that really is important as well, is the families did not want to talk about their fear of the South. They did not fully share the intensity of the risk that they were at in terms of lives, and the inability to protect your child. What a tremendous fear for a parent, right? And it really, we cannot speak loudly enough to the intensity of that and the life choices that it influences.
Look, we're out of time, guys. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest, we had Attorney General Keith Ellison on earlier, and then Lee Jordan opened the show talking about Juneteenth. Pay attention, get involved, connect, embrace. And my guest, Hollis Winston, candidate for mayor of Brooklyn Park. You'll be back again and again, I hope. And we want to have people know that you're out there making a stand and you have an intention of winning. And Anthony, I've introduced you as a co-host for the next several weeks. So as often as you're able, I want you to be here hanging out with me. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Tomorrow.